Welcome back, everyone. This is another Q&A video. I'm not done yet with all the library reviews, but I wanted to get this in because I got so many audience questions. So here's Q&A part 2. Also, thank you very much for continuously watching my channel. It's been growing over the past year. So thank you very much for the continued support. So question number 1, let me look. How rough of a sketch will you send a client, trusting them to hear what you intend? You don't really send a sketch anymore. This is not a thing anymore. You send a refined mock-up with high production value. I know we all, saw these videos of John Williams sitting there at the piano and playing his stuff to Steven Spielberg. Yeah, that used to be a thing, but that's not a thing anymore. We now have the tools to actually, before the session, to create a realistic sounding mock-up. And so that's what we're gonna do because, it's always nicer if the production can already hear something resembling the final result. Because making changes on the spot at the session is so much harder than making the changes before. So you want to avoid that, and the easiest way to avoid that is by doing mock-ups beforehand. Also, something I learned from working with Klaus actually is he doesn't even call them mock-ups anymore, because he was saying, mock-ups are something that, say an architect would do of, a model of a building that they're about to build. But he was saying, well, what we're doing isn't really thrown out at the end. We actually use this to create the final product. So, and often it's mixed into the final product. So it's not really a mock-up anymore. It is actually part of the final product. But yeah, so sketching, rough sketches are not a thing anymore unless you have a really close relationship with the director, and maybe they'll allow this for a short period of time, but it's not a thing on a professional production. Definitely not. Question number 2. Do orchestrators actively look at the picture when they are taking a composer's mock-up and turning it into a proper orchestral score, or is that beyond the scope of their job? Some do, some don't. It's not really a requirement because all the information should be contained in the MIDI. All the hit points should be in the markers if there are any. The tempo map is there, all the notes are there. So technically they don't need the picture for it. It also depends on the level of the production, whether I can even give out picture. I mean, you want the picture. If it's a studio production or a mid-level production, you don't want the picture to float around at too many people's studios. And since the orchestrator is usually not on site, that would be sending the picture out to another third party. And you try to avoid that if it's not necessary. Sometimes I've had an instance on one movie where a cue was already printed and sent to the stage, but they wanted to do a last-minute, revision. That could be accommodated in the orchestration. So we would send over the picture and go, hey, in these 8 bars, they wanted a bigger rise or a bigger crescendo or something. Could you go in and kind of do this type of thing in order to have that ready for the session? Because there wasn't really time anymore to do that in the mock-up and then reprint all the stems and all that. You'd have to redo that later, of course, for mixing. But yeah, that can happen. That has happened on some of my productions. But, it's not necessarily a common thing to ask the orchestrators to do that. Question number 3. Why do some composers use streamers and punches even though there is a metronome in the orchestral recordings? I can make a separate video about punches and streamers and what they are and how they work. And how you would conduct with them, but I haven't seen composers use them in a long time. That's an olden days type of thing. Having a click track is the norm, but without punches and streamers. Both wouldn't really make sense because you would use punches and streamers when you don't have a click track or when you don't want to use a click track. I remember we've done some drama where we've done a lot of free time, so no click, no punches, no streamers, because there weren't a lot of hit points and the tempo was slow, so the conductor could actually, figure it out. And so we could get a slightly more dramatic and musical performance, but it's not super common. You can request punches and streamers if you want to do that at your session. They can be created, but usually there's no real need. Sometimes, since you were asking about click and punches and streamers, there could be an instance where you either have warning clicks on top of the punches and streamers into a new tempo, or what you could have is that you do a portion of the cue with click because it has a lot of hit points, but then you do a portion without it and just use punches and streamers. But you wouldn't use both at the same time. Like that would just be pointless. Everybody would just be listening to the click. But yeah, punches and streamers, not necessarily a thing anymore because it also costs more session time because you need to rehearse a little bit. So, not necessarily a thing of the present or future. Question number 4. What are your connections with the re-recording mixers on a dub stage? That varies from project to project and also depending on whether I'm just the composer or whether I'm the composer and also the music editor. Sometimes there's no interaction whatsoever other than getting the delivery specs from the dub stage and then delivering the files to them. There can sometimes not be any further communication between us. If I'm there, it's a much closer interaction because I can, give comments in real time and also make edits if there are any edits that need to be done. They don't have to do that. I can just do it quickly on, a separate machine and give it to them. So then the interaction between us is, much, much better and much closer than it otherwise would be. And sometimes it's an in-between relationship. I've had it where they would reach out to me and kind of chat with me about a specific cue or a specific edit they would want. Even though I wouldn't be there, they would kind of keep me in the loop about the changes they're making or kind of making edits, but then sending them over to see if I agree with the edits or if I feel like I can do better edits than them, or if they need anything. So sometimes it's also a little bit of back and forth via email if they need anything or if they kind of want to be careful, not step on my toes, which I'm not very sensitive about this, but it's always a different dub stage, so they don't know. So some of the re-recording mixers kind of want to be careful and not step on the composer's toes, and then they will communicate if there's anything that they're changing or anything that needs to be done, and sometimes they want to give you a chance to do it yourself. Sometimes they will also send me a nice playout that I can listen to before they have the final screening, just so I can see if all the cues were placed correctly or if there are any mistakes, if anything happened. And sometimes I also need it, of course, to create the cue sheet if I'm the music editor. But yeah, that's the general relationship. It really varies greatly depending on how involved I am in the dub mix. But at the end of the day, the composer is often not invited to the dub stage, which I find problematic. I think someone from the music department should be there, be it a music editor or the composer, because mistakes happen a lot more than you would think. And sometimes they make edits and I think, you know what, I could have done this better and I could have done this cleaner. So, I wish they would invite us a lot more than they do. But I also understand that you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen and then everybody has comments or feedback. When I am at the dub stage, I try to really be careful to not be that annoying composer who's always like, but the music should be louder. Pick your battles. Question number 5. Are you ever going to release MIDI packs or custom sounds for us to use? Oh my lord. No. Just sit down and do the work, you lazy f***. Okay, I'm gonna be serious for 1 second. Because I have been talking with my colleagues about this lately. Because we see all these ads all over social media, but also even on my videos and their videos. And it's ads ranging from, buy this MIDI pack or this chord pack and you will sound like a professional, or take this 10-week class and you will be an expert in whatever, mixing, orchestration, or composition. Or buy this magical plugin and it will fix all your mixes. That's bullshit. Being expert level at anything requires time and effort, and if you can't be bothered to do that, then don't pursue this. You're just not that passionate about this field, and that is fine, but then don't pursue it professionally. There are no shortcuts. It's like me driving in LA and I get all cheeky all of a sudden and think I know where I'm going, and I turn off the navigation system. And then I'm stuck in traffic and I don't want to take the long way and I get impatient and I try to take a shortcut which always ends in a dead end, or a one-way street that I'm stuck on for 10 minutes that takes me further away from where I actually need to go. Or you try to save yourself into this little side alley, which then turns into a freeway entrance to the opposite direction of where you wanted to go. And then you're stuck on the 405. Driving in LA is a nightmare. My point being, cutting corners doesn't get you anywhere. It only gets you lost, and then you have to stop the car and turn on the navigation again and take the long way, and it only leads to disaster in the long run. Whenever someone asks me, oh, do you really need music theory to do this? Or do you really need orchestration? Or do you really need counterpoint to write orchestral music? What I'm hearing is, I'm not really all that interested in this field, and I don't want to put in the work. Down the road, once you enter the professional world, there's great harm in not knowing enough. There's almost no harm in knowing too much. I mean, worst case scenario, you end up with a bunch of skills and knowledge that you don't need. The other way around, way worse. It's always important to keep in mind, whatever you want to do, if you want to become an expert, if you want to become a professional, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And that goes particularly for this profession. Anything in the arts, it takes a long time to learn. And you got to stick with it and do it for a long time. Otherwise, it's really not worth it. Then don't waste your time. If you're not willing to do that, don't waste your life trying to pursue something that you're clearly not passionate about. Then do something else and stay a hobbyist, which is perfectly fine. It's fine to be a hobby composer. Don't think that just because you like to do this on occasion or a little bit, that you have to do this professionally. Really busted out the wine for that one. What is temp music and what has been your experience with it? I'm gonna need more wine for this. Okay, temp music is something a lot of composers whine about. I don't actually have a particular issue with it. It's essentially music. Temp music is essentially music that the filmmaker or a music editor puts into the movie when they're editing in order to see if it works. And also for pre-screenings. If you've ever seen a movie without music, I know on the internet there are some famous movie scenes floating around without music, and you can see that it doesn't work. It's absolutely awful. And so you wouldn't have a test screening with a test audience or with producers or something or other investors without having music in the thing, because it would be so alienating. The pacing is off and the emotional content is off and the subtext isn't there. There's just so much missing when the music is missing. It's funny, you don't often notice the music when it's there, but once it's taken out, you absolutely notice how awful it is. So temp music in that sense is necessary. It's also necessary for the filmmakers to discuss what they want in terms of music and to kind of already put in different versions and kind of see where are we going with this tonally. Now, what composers complain about is temp love, which is when a filmmaker has seen the movie so many times with this pre-made music in it, sometimes they get really attached to it. Or sometimes the editor also edits with specific music laid out in the scene, and then, it really shows. And so then they can't imagine anything else going into that scene because sometimes it was constructed that way even. And sometimes they're just used to it, that you kind of have to rip off the temp music. Now you can circumvent this in different ways. You can do something that I like to do a lot, which is also be the music editor. So you already involved earlier on and you get to temp the movie and you decide what music goes in there and you're kind of part of that discussion already from the start. Or if you have that kind of relationship with the director, you can also start writing music before they even shoot the movie. So you're already involved in pre-production, not in post-production, where you write a bunch of stuff that they can basically put into the movie or that they can actually temp with. So that's incredibly helpful for them. And it's also helpful for you because you're only dealing with your own music that you've already written for the production. Sometimes they even play it on set and then, you know, the actors can get influenced by it. So it's a much more collaborative approach as opposed to temping the thing and then sometime during the very last phases of the movie, the composer comes in and kind of has to do what has already been decided before. Now, sometimes you can't help it. And frankly, I don't mind it as a communication tool with filmmakers because they're often not musically educated, so they can't tell you exactly what they want, but they can point you to pieces of music, sometimes a playlist even, that they prepared for you, and just go, well, I like this general atmosphere, I like the tone of this track, I like the pacing of this track. You know, you just need to figure out what about the temp is it that they like. Because sometimes they just gravitate towards a very specific thing and nothing else. So you can still do whatever you want to do as long as you keep that specific element. And it's a very good tool to get on the same page with the filmmakers, because a piece that they might find, say, hopeful, I might not find hopeful, or something that I find funny, maybe to them isn't funny. So kind of looking at different pieces of music and getting on the same page is really crucial here. Also, if I'm on a movie and we've reached version 3 or something on a queue and it's a rewrite again, something I also learned from Klaus is then play music editor and play them different pre-existing music to a scene and kind of figure out what they want, because clearly you're not on the same page. You'll also find that you get bothered by it less the more music you write. Because if I'm writing a whole feature film and there's, 60 to 90 minutes of music to be written, and then for 2 minutes of music there's some temp love, I don't really care. I still have so many minutes of music where I can do what I want that I'm not gonna get hung up on, these 2 minutes of music where I need to kind of sound like someone else. It's not really a big deal. And especially if you do several feature films or TV shows per year, you get less attached to every individual tiny thing that you do. Question number 7. Any book or resource on how to get started on writing music? That's a difficult question because it kind of depends on what kind of music you want to write. For me, this one was really helpful. Musical Composition by Reginald Smith Brindle. Yes. I also like The War of Art, which isn't really a composition technique book, but it's more a book on, motivation and what makes it's kind of an inspirational book. If I had to summarize it, I would say it's basically coming down to stop being a lazy piece of shit. But I find it helpful whenever I feel like I'm procrastinating or I need a little bit of motivation. I can just read a chapter of that book and I'm feeling motivated again. Because it's kind of a kick in the ass, really. Then I think I've mentioned this before. I find The Study of Orchestration very helpful by Samuel Adler, and I find Korsakov's orchestration book very helpful. There's also plenty of books about counterpoint and stuff like that I've read, but I don't remember which ones they were. It was stuff that I read in college or before in preparation. But it's not that hard to find a good counterpoint and a good music theory book. usually written by people much smarter and much more well studied than I am. So, just look for it and read through them. Or here's an oldie but goodie. Go to your local library. I'm pretty sure they have something. Do you write library music? Not really. Not often. I have like roughly maybe 20 tracks in one library. It's not a lot. I've gotten some placements for some reason, but it's not something I do full time because I don't have the time for it. And in between projects, if I have 2 or 3 weeks, I like to kind of recharge my creative energy instead of jumping into library music. Also, my style of writing doesn't necessarily lend itself to library music. But yeah, I'm booked almost 100% of the time, so in between my gigs, I really want to just kind of relax, recharge my creative energy, and optimize my workflow and my equipment and all that stuff. Some people said I should put my rejected music into libraries, but I actually don't have that much rejected music because of the way I work. And sometimes I also don't actually own rejected music. It's kind of a contract thing. Sometimes you own it, sometimes you don't. But yeah, a lot of my projects don't have rejected cues. It's mostly just light revisions that I usually have to do. So it's not like after a project I have, 20 tracks that haven't been used or anything. I have maybe one. But also, since I write so thematically heavy, even rejected tracks I couldn't really use because it's using the theme of the movie. So yeah, the way I work, it doesn't really make sense. I would have to heavily rework any rejected tracks that I even have. And then, it's too much work for too little reward. Because in order to really make a living or have a proper side income from library music, you'd have to do this a lot. You'd have to have thousands of tracks in a library or in multiple libraries, and just really write tracks every week and just, feed into it. Because a single track is not going to make a lot of money, usually. It's really the amount of tracks that you have that are getting licensed around the world that is going to yield all that income. But so for me, that doesn't really make sense. Question number 9. Is it better to push forward with something that you don't love for a scene or wait for inspiration? We don't usually have time to wait for inspiration. That's not a thing. I think that really separates the professional from the amateur. This is why it's really important to spend some time before the movie with the themes and really refining the sound and the orchestration or whatever it is you intend to do, and really produce material ahead of time so that you don't run into that problem. That way you already have the material you're going to work with, so you don't need inspiration, all you need is technique. So if I'm not feeling inspired or creative for a scene, all I have to do is take the material I already have, the themes, and use some kind of technique on it, orchestration-wise or in an arrangement or however composition technique that I know that would fit the scene, and just arrange it around the theme. And my job is done. So you don't need to be particularly creative or inspired for that. Especially at the end of a project, I'm not all that inspired anymore. I mean, everyone's creative energy is exhausted after months of writing, and this is kind of where technique comes in. This is also why I tend to tell people, learn technique, either in school or by yourself, doesn't really matter. But learn it, because it's going to save your butt at the end of a project when you don't really feel creative anymore, but you can just, use that knowledge that you have, apply it to the material you already have, and then you're fine. You can still complete the project on time. Without being able to fall back on technique, I think I would have missed quite a few deadlines in my career, because I would have relied far too heavily on inspiration to strike at the opportune moment, which it usually doesn't. So don't wait for it. You're gonna miss a deadline, and that's kind of an unforgivable thing in our industry. I mean, not all deadlines are equal, but if you miss the final deadline for the recording session or the dub stage, that's serious, and that will get you fired or at least not rehired. Question number 10, why are you not on the latest version of your libraries and software? That's the golden rule of any professional. At any studio, they will tell you, do not update to the latest system, the latest OS, the latest version of your work software, or the latest version of libraries. The reason is compatibility, of course. A newer version isn't necessarily a better version, but more importantly, you often have to be backwards compatible. You still have to be able to open old sessions. And, once you update one thing, say, once I update Cubase, I might have to update a lot of other stuff as well. Some stuff might not work, some stuff might not be compatible yet. If I update my OS, even worse, especially with Apple. This is one of the main reasons why I moved away from Apple and towards Microsoft, because their frequent updates without giving people a big heads up and, making everything incompatible for months on end. That's a problem for any professional. I need my software to work. So if it works, just leave it alone until you're really in between projects for a long time and you're not going to have to open certain things anymore. Then again, you never really know, because I just did a sequel. I did Help I Shrunk My Friends, which is a sequel to Help I Shrunk My Parents. And I had to open old sessions again. With updated libraries, some of it may not play back anymore the way I had it back then. And also, I remember when I did my internship at Remote Control, they were just preparing to jump into one of the Pirates sequels, and they had to spend a long time basically reversing all of their software and all of their OSs and everything to older systems so that they could access old sessions again from the previous movies and access sounds that would only open on the old system that were now discontinued or wouldn't play back on the newer system. So it's a thing, and usually you definitely wait a month, if not longer. You wait for the first update or the second update of the software before you make the jump. And with libraries, some of them might have improved over time. I've noticed that in my library reviews, that with a lot of stuff, I'm not on the latest version. If it works for you, don't update. And some of the playability might also have changed so much that if I were to open a queue now, it might play back very differently. So then you have to keep the legacy version of all the patches, and it just becomes a thing. So if I'm happy with something, I tend to not update. Or I at least wait for a couple of versions and then I go for it. I hope this was helpful. I'm gonna record another one of these because I got a flood of questions. So I have another 10 questions to go through. And I'm also gonna continue with the library stuff. I have several libraries to review actually that have been sent to me by developers. And there's also still the choir and keys and plucks video coming up. So I'm trying to get all that done for Black Friday so that people can be informed, of what they want to buy. If you've been questioning certain libraries, maybe I can give some input. Maybe not. That's fine too. Just buy whatever you want.